Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is a podcast where we look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our just general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. Today, I have a true expert in building science. It's lovely to get building science back on the agenda here at the show. I've got Joseph Lstiburek from buildingscience.com and the Building Science Organization. Joseph, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to talk to another Canadian.
Yeah, it's always cool. I've had a few Canadians on the show, and it's great to have somebody who can understand when I say A and say sorry a bunch of times in the middle of the conversation.
Let's take off, eh? Beauty, eh?
Yeah, you're old enough to remember those fabulous shows. Let's start by learning a little bit about you, besides that you're Canadian and you're about my age. So let's talk about your background. I know you're a physicist. Tell us about why you chose physics and engineering physics, and tell us about the path that led you to create Building Science and buildingscience.com.
Well, first of all, I was born in Toronto, and my dad was head of the engineering department at de Havilland Aircraft. And so he was in charge of the otter, the beaver, the buffalo, the caribou. And so I grew up around planes. And all I ever wanted to be was a pilot. But my eyesight sucked so bad, there was no way that I could end up being a pilot. And so I thought, well, hell, if I couldn't fly them, I'd design them. So I ended up at the University of Toronto, aerospace engineering science, and that was it. And so engineering science, the aero option was part of the engineering physics program. And I graduated after 4 years. 200 of us started, 12 of us graduated. And so I get to say, well, I graduated at the bottom of my class. When I graduated, I couldn't get a job. So I ended up as a laborer on a construction site. And I started asking questions like, why the heck are you doing this? What about that? And I wasn't getting interesting answers, but the building officials adopted me. I was a young punk kid, and I didn't hate building officials. I mean, they knew stuff and they started telling me stories. And then I would start asking questions, and you need to talk to these old guys at the Division of Building Research, National Research Council of Canada. And I just drove there and just showed up a coffee break. And I got adopted by the legends. I got adopted by Gus Handegord, Mark Baumberg, and teased the hell out of me. It was a 5.5 hour drive from my mother's basement to the National Research Council of Canada. I would do it one day a week. And they were kind of surprised. It's 5 hours and he's just showing up for the coffee break in the morning. So then they, said, no, you got to stay for the day. And they kind of adopted me. And they said, look, you need to take John Timisk's program at the University of Toronto. And so Timisk was another one of those phenomenal legends. And so I ended up taking my master's with Professor Timisk, John Timisk, and it got me going. And then I kept asking questions and they kept, read this, do that. And I started traveling around Canada first, and then North America, everywhere else. And it was awesome. The old timers knew other old timers. And so I was a young punk and I got adopted. It was absolutely wonderful. And so now I'm the old guy because the old guys are retired or dead or whatever. And so now I go out of my way. Anytime a youngster asks a question, emails a question, I'll go to the end of the earth to talk to them and help them out because I'm just paying back what the legends did for me.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. So, like the actual work that you did after you got your master's degree, I think you ultimately got a PhD too, right, Joseph? Is that correct?
Yeah, piled higher and deeper. That's what PhD stands for.
Yeah.
So I have a doctorate. It's in civil engineering, but the specialty is building science. There are only 2 programs in Canada that do this. One is the University of Toronto, and the other is the University of Waterloo. And Waterloo's got a phenomenal program. It's run right now by John Straub. Strauby is going to be the best. John Straub is going to be the best who ever was. The guy he's got a wicked sense of humor, and some of his jokes I cannot repeat to be, I just
Well, we're not live, so we definitely could have taken care of that. But yeah, I've been trying to get John on the show for 2 years now, and so far I haven't had any luck. But I'm going to keep trying because.
Tell him that Lstiburek said he needs to do the show, and you need to ask him about Straubisms. He's got a few phrases that are. I'm not going to. I want you to be shocked in a smiley way when he comes out with them, but just telling you he is amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I'll go back and take another swing and see if I can persuade him to come and join me because, I've been hearing his name from everybody for a very long time. So I definitely want to get him on. So tell us what you did, when you went down this road with building science. What kind of work were you doing that related to building science?
I was director of research for the Home Builders Association. I was given the R2000 program to implement, and we were supposed to build 1,000 energy efficient houses. And I got nervous because I said, look, you insulate, you're going to change the energy flow. And at the time, we had something called the CHIP program, the Canadian Home Insulation Program. When we blew insulation in attics, they all rotted. And then to solve the problems, we sprayed the attic ceilings to make them airtight. And that interfered with combustion safety. And I predicted that houses were going to rot and that people might get sick and die. Well, a family of 4 died in Mississauga, the De Michels, and I went to the coroner's inquest and I wanted to testify. And they said, well, come back next week and whatever. I was told if I was going to testify, I'd lose my job. And so I looked at my iron ring and I said, I'm going to testify. So I testified. I got fired. I got blacklisted. Couldn't work in Canada. Ended up going to the United States. And when I wrote papers, I couldn't write under my real name, Lstiburek. I wrote under the nom de plume, Steve Brick. And then one of the guys that was at the coroner's inquest, famous guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but he says, I got $1 million. Could you do all of the, some spillage and backdrafting testing and whatever? And so I did, but he says, the deal was, I can't give you the money. I'm going to give it to the University of Toronto. Timmis is going to look after it. This will be your master's degree. So I did all the spillage and backdrafting tests, and then that actually got adopted by the U.S. Department of Energy STAR program and their weatherization stuff. And so the Americans ended up ahead of us because Canadians died. We fixed things, but we didn't make a big deal out of it. Now, here we go, 30, 40 years later, Canadian building science is the best in the world. The Europeans aren't in Canada's league. Oh my God, the Australians and the New Zealanders, they're as bad as we were in the 70s and in the 80s. The United States doesn't know what they're doing. I'm struggling. I can race racing cars and I'm basically dealing with parking taxis because we've got so much to implement and teach in the United States.
Give me 1 or 2 examples of where, Canadian code is way ahead of American code. Because this is the first time I've actually heard that expressed. So I'd love to just dig a little bit deeper on that.
Well, we have sealed combustion appliances and we have ventilation systems that don't over-ventilate. We know water management, air management, vapor management, thermal management. I became famous for something called the perfect wall. All I did was took 1960s papers that were written by Hutchin and Handegord and Bomberg and UNESCO, and all I did was I took a black and white image and colored it. So I'm the Ted Turner of building science. I colorized it.
Right.
I gave it clever names. I called it the perfect wall, and I said, after fire and structure, you need 4 control layers: a water control layer, an air control layer, a vapor control layer, and a thermal control layer. And they should all be on the outside of the structure, and it'll work in every climate zone in the world. and you don't have to do a calculation. And that was it. And so, gee, I'm famous for taking stuff that had already been done and popularized it. And I'm not complaining about this. I mean, my doctorate wasn't on this. My doctorate was on complex three-dimensional airflow networks. And I added stuff that had never been done before, but it's puny compared to what the legends did in Ottawa in the 60s and 70s. And somebody says, well, what should we read? Download the Canadian Building Digest, the CBDs. And I wanted to Americanize them. And so I was now living in the United States because I couldn't work in Canada. And I started writing Building Science Digests for the ASHRAE Journal. I've written over 150 of them, and I got another 300 papers I did. And those were just my version of wanting to do what the Canadian Building Science Digests were about, but I wanted to popularize them. So I tried to put in a little bit of humor. And, look, the United States is a weird place. They have Houston and they have Florida. We don't have Houston and Florida. We've got a cold climate. The only weird place is British Columbia and Halifax. And, the joke is in Canada, we have 2 seasons, this winter and last winter. In the United States, you've got hot, humid, you got all of the climate zones. And American codes and practices are significantly more challenging than what we've been doing in Canada. Just letting you know.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Solar heat gain doesn't have to be a design challenge. Solera translucent glazing units help architects create buildings that not only work better, but feel better, balancing light, comfort, and energy efficiency. Discover how to design higher value spaces without compromise at advancedglazings.com.
All right, I want to talk about the companies that you have now, Building Science Corporation and buildingscience.com, which I believe are 2 different companies. Can you explain what they do and why they're different?
Okay. Building Science Corporation was consulting. Now, we grew my partner, Betsy Pettit, who lowered her standards. She's an architect and she married an engineer. You imagine that. We grew that company to...
That's like dogs and cats getting married.
There you go. Okay. Well, we grew that to 30 employees in 2 countries with 2 labs. And we gave the Canadian operation to the Canadians. And they ended up getting bought up. Straub and Schumacher, they got bought by RDH. Right. And RDH is phenomenal. And then the Canadian company, Betsy and I gifted that company to our employees. And so I'm no longer running an engineering consulting company. I'm telling stories and that may or may not be true and having a blast teaching. And so the buildingscience.com is where I write all of my papers and insights. And I love online teaching. So I've got a course that I run every month for 16 hours, fundamentals, Tuesday and a Thursday from 1 to 5 Eastern, 2 weeks in a row, and just teaching the fundamentals because there's no real place in the United States or Canada that actually covers all of that in a way that normal people like builders and contractors and architects can understand. And so my retirement has been speaking and teaching and running around, keeping some of my past clients out of trouble. When you're a nobody and struggling and somebody takes care of you 20 years ago and they get into trouble, you will go out of your way, and drop everything, come out of the nursing home to help them out if they get into trouble. So I've gone from 90-hour weeks to 20-hour weeks. I've gone from traveling 3 days a week to traveling 3 days a month. And I'm having a blast writing and telling stories, some of which are true and some of which are not true.
We'll leave it to the beholders to decide which are true and what's not true. So I have to expand on that a little bit, Joseph. How are our universities falling short in terms of building science or civil engineering or architecture? Where are we falling short? And where's the gap that buildingscience.com had to make up?
Well, look, architects aren't being taught anything except art. And don't look, I'm gonna get nasty comments and whatever, but architects aren't being taught what they need to do in order to do their job. The architect is in charge of everything. The architect's seal. So they are now having to hire consultants to teach them water, air, and vapor and thermal management. That is called building science, but it's embarrassing. Architects should be taught this, and they're not. I mean, there's one architectural program, I'm going to brag a little bit, that is doing that. And that's at Virginia Tech. The professor there that's teaching that is my daughter, Christine Williamson, ended up, are you kidding, becoming an architect. And I'm like, wow, okay. And so, there's nothing else. There's a really good program in building science on the engineering side at Penn State. Bill Banfleff was the pioneer there, and he was the past president of ASHRAE. So Penn State has got a good program. And I'm afraid to say this because they didn't like me for a lot of years, but Lawrence Berkeley out in California is pretty damn good. Just don't tell anybody that I said nice things about them. Okay. There's like, oh my God, he said nice. Okay. You can share that, but it shouldn't be that way. The trade schools in high school and community colleges should be teaching water management and flashing, good, bad, don't be a dope, slope. If you want to save cash, flash. If things get wet, it's okay if they dry, but if they don't dry, you're in trouble. And by the way, drying requires an exchange of energy. What have we done to the energy reduction changes? We've reduced them, which means things stay wet longer, which means you have to keep them from getting wet in the first place. Well, we never had to do this before. Well, that's because when they got wet, buildings were energy pigs and they're able to dry. And then they get flabbergasted. I said, we used to go to these places called forests and cut trees down and cut them into boards and build boats out of them and sail them around the world. Try doing that with a sheet of OSB. I call OSB the spam of wood. I call spam the OSB of luncheon meats. I mean, are you kidding me? I view engineered wood as an insult to wood and engineers, but that's what we're building with. And so the water sensitivity of our materials is going up. The energy exchange is going down. We have to really get on board with the physics. And it's not just the architects. I mean, the structural engineers, they need to do their thing. The fire people need to understand the energy raters. So you're measuring energy, but you don't know whether the wall or roof or foundation is actually going to work. Now we've got the indoor air quality cult, and I'm being polite, the cult. Dilution is not the solution to indoor pollution. Source control is. And, let's ventilate up the yin-yang wazoo. Yin-yang is two wazoos. That's a metric term I understand. And the trouble is that those high air change rates are actually causing more problems than they're solving. So you should be building your buildings out of stuff that is not bad. Stuff should stay in the stuff. So your materials shouldn't give off bad stuff. Your assemblies shouldn't give off bad stuff. You shouldn't be doing bad stuff in the building. And if you really think you can do all of that stuff and then ventilate like crazy, you have no idea, because the high ventilation rates are actually causing more of a problem than they're solving. In cold climates, the houses get too dry and you have to add a humidifier. I call humidifiers ISIS bioweapons because they evaporate your water. And, the Mayo Clinic says you have to use distilled water in the humidifier. I see that all the time, don't you, distilled water. And then in the South, we have humidity problems, and so we need to dehumidify. Well, in the old days, air conditioners used to do that. But now the air conditioners don't run enough to dehumidify. See, they only dehumidify when they're running. And what have we done to the runtime? And then we've increased the efficiency. We've gone to 15, 17, 18 SEER, which means they can't actually remove the moisture anyway. And so we need something called dehumidifiers. So remember, Mrs. Robinson, the future is plastics. Well, the future turns out to be we need dehumidifiers in the United States and humidifiers in the northern part of the United States and Canada. And because, well, we need to dilute like crazy. And I'm saying, no, you have no idea. You're actually causing more problems. Well, how do we handle the contaminants? Don't bring them in the first place. Don't have them there in the first damn place. Well, how do we know? Well, okay. So don't be depressed. We have an answer and we have some politics. And here's the answer. We're getting to the point where we can economically measure stuff in the air. Whoa! We can measure PM 2.5 particles. We can measure VOCs. We can measure carbon dioxide. And so we can ventilate according to what we measure. So guess what the issue is? We don't have the health and epidemiological information to decide what is healthy and what is not healthy. So the politics isn't going to be about whether we can control it. We can. Politics is going to be what should be the number. And the trouble is right now, people are over-ventilating, and that's causing more problems in other areas. So the medical community is well behind the building physics community. So I'm saying, hey, get your act together, medical community. We need you. We can't decide. And I don't want you just to pull numbers out of your butt. I mean, you got cute butts, I understand that, but that's not the way to do it. So there you go. There's my core dump.
So, okay, boy, there's a lot there to sort of dive into, but let's dive into the general, like the big picture concept of the ventilation. I just have to go in there. So what would you be monitoring, right? What would you be monitoring in terms of the air you're bringing in and then the air that's already in the building?
Particle morphology 2.5 and volatile organic compounds. Okay. I think carbon dioxide is a complete waste and utter waste of time that makes absolutely no freaking sense. And then I would control the interior relative humidity to make sure that I don't do stupid things. The dumbest thing that was done was the CDC recommending humidification to handle COVID. I had a lot of fun. I got into so much trouble. I said, if you can't do math or physics, go into medicine. If you can't do medicine, join the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. Well, I got a call and I said, well, are you mad at us? And he says, no, can you come and help fix our lab?
Right.
I understand there are people at the CDC that know what they're doing, but the politics is convoluted and complicated. I know you're shocked at that.
Look, any large organization that involves a lot of government funding is going to end up with a complicated structure. It just sort of always tends to work that way. What, I'm trying to think of how to pose this question, but, let's talk big picture. Like ventilation is, yes, it's maybe even at a cult-like status. It's absolutely critical these days. We've got a lot of people working on new equipment so that everything is real time. Everything is, we know what's happening at any particular moment. So we're definitely falling short. You're saying we're falling short in terms of measuring, the fact that we're measuring CO2, which shouldn't matter. And we're not doing a good job measuring the VOCs and particulate. Now, I know particulate's a big issue, especially with all the fires that we've been having recently. Is there other particulates that we should be concerned about besides the stuff that's coming from the intense amount of wildfires that we've had these last few years?
Well, we generate particulates in the buildings just simply by living in them, all right?
Right. Just abrasion, you mean?
And we can filter them out.
Okay.
We have the technology to handle all of this, except that the politics is making us choose rates and numbers that are not justifiable. And it's frustrating. And I'm going to get into trouble with this. Well, you're not a medical doctor. And I said, no, I have a personality and I know physics. But I mean, it's not complicated to say the connections haven't been made between the level of contaminants in the air and the disease risk. And we need to focus on that. And people are just picking numbers out of their butt and then multiplying it by 10 to build in a safety factor. And the rates are becoming so high that they're actually causing more problems than they're solving. And the first thing that people do in their modern airtight house with their overventilation is they turn it off. That's kind of dumb, isn't it?
Right.
That's because civilians have figured out that what they're being told and what they're being sold is actually not correct. And you ponder that for a minute, okay? I mean, how did we get to such a screw up where you can't believe the activists in the medical community and their numbers? So there you go. I'm sure that I will never be invited back on your show.
No, let's not go there at all. No, I really just want to hear your opinions because this matters a whole lot. You mentioned that CO2, it was useless to monitor CO2, which feels like blasphemy in this world. Why are we wasting our time measuring CO2?
Well, CO2 wasn't the contaminant. CO2 is just an indication of occupancy.
Right.
And so what we want to know is what are the actual contaminants in the space?
Right.
All right. And CO2 doesn't tell you that. It's, well, it gives us with the air change. No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. Well, how do we do the air change? And the answer is, get rid of the big freaking holes and put in a fan. And now you control the air change. You can dial in whatever number you want. Now, the issue is going to be, well, what should that number be? And that's where the argument is. Well, shouldn't it be based on you have source control and dilution? Now, this is really straightforward. You can't do source control on people. You can't say, Mrs. Koznowski, you got 4 kids, 3 of them have to go away. That would be source control. So you ventilate according to people, and then you don't create the other stuff that needs to be ventilated. So source control for the building, the products, and the activities, and dilution for the people. And we're conflating them. And until we separate them, we did that a long time ago. It's just that those people wrote it in things called books, which are found in libraries. But they're very old books, and you have to ask a librarian to get them. And that involves a social interaction, which is why none of this is happening.
Listen, I had the right side of my brain removed when I got my engineering degree as well. It was just part of the. It was just you had to take that surgery. So back to the CO2 things. I'm sorry, I can't let it go because I just want to understand it. So do we monitor oxygen levels, or are we just inferring that the oxygen level will be adequate if we have the appropriate level of turns? Or
no, I think we should measure volatile organic compounds.
Yeah.
I think we should measure particle morphology 2.5.
Yeah.
We should make sure that we don't have issues with respect to carbon monoxide. And we need to control relative humidity. Too much humidity, you got a disaster. Too little humidity, you got a disaster.
Yes.
Those are not complicated. The issue is going to be, well, what is the number? And oh my God, the food fights that are already occurring over that, it's incredible. And I'm trying to step back and let the fight happen. And just, because there's mostly politics and individual and sectors fighting one another and manufacturers of various products and approaches. And the medical community is not doing its job. That's all I got to tell you.
The medical community has no connection to, no connectivity to any sort of, what do they call it, BRIs, building related, what does the I stand for?
There are a few people. Now you think about this.
Yeah.
There are what, 300 million people in North America? And you got to,
more than that, yeah.
Well, I'm talking about the legal ones.
Yeah, okay.
Again, they don't let me teach undergraduates anymore because apparently it's just, the snowflakes are all whatever. But no, we're not rising to the task. We will. Here's my description of the United States. I'm quoting Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill said, "Americans can always be counted upon to do the right thing after all of the alternatives have been exhausted." it.
Right.
And we're working our way through doing the dumb stuff. And overventilation is as much of a problem as underventilation. And what we really ought to be doing is source control and ventilating only according to what we measure. And the argument is, the right one is, what should that number be that we're able to measure? And that's where the next 10 years is going to be. That's where the next 10 years is going to be.
Right. Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the, you've been involved with some upgrades like deep energy upgrades or even health-based upgrades. I believe that's the case. What are the things that you just do every time? Are there some things that like you just know you're going to have to do when you run into an older building, a historical building, or even just an older building? Are there steps that you just know you're going to have to take every time?
Well, okay. Older buildings, the crappy ones are gone, right?
Right.
No,
Right. Right.
the crappy ones are gone.
Right.
The that are left are still left because, number one is fire, they haven't burned.
Right.
Number two, structure, they haven't fallen down. And number three are the damage functions, which are water, heat, and ultraviolet light. I'm focusing on water, heat, and ultraviolet light, and that's an energy thing. It's okay for older buildings to get wet if they dry. Now, what are we doing? We're wanting everybody to go to net zero. Now, I don't have an issue with that, okay? I'm an engineer. Engineers are born with a genetic defect. It's the efficiency gene. We can't help ourselves. But I'm an old engineer, and I know that if I insulate an old building, I'm going to change the drying potential. So I have to reduce the wetting potential. And so the number one thing in existing buildings is handling rain and handling rain. Did I mention handling rain?
Right.
Followed by groundwater, where the building touches the ground. So rain and groundwater. You kind of get that. Then I handle humidity. And I handle, there's a big deal. Excess of humidity or too little humidity. And I can't deal with those things until I've handled the rain and the groundwater. Okay, this is
right.
And then I have to say, well, where are we? Well, there's a big difference between Miami and Memphis and Minneapolis and Montreal.
And Nova Scotia.
There isn't an M city in Nova Scotia, is there?
There's what?
What's a city that starts with M in Nova Scotia?
The city?
I'm trying to add,
let's go. I'm sorry. Yeah, Muscadabit.
Okay, there you go. So
there you go.
I'm trying to be inclusive. Okay,
I gotcha.
Yeah. And so, all right. So each of those places has a different humidity load with ventilation, right?
Right.
And now I've got, oh my God, I'm going to be incredibly thermally efficient, and I need to spend energy to dehumidify. And so as I increase the ventilation rates, I'm increasing the moisture load. Most of the places, some places I'm decreasing the moisture load in the wintertime, but I end up having to deal with dehumidification and humidification. And people don't understand that's not easy to do without getting yourself into trouble. In the old days, the air conditioners were dehumidifiers.
Right.
They ran a lot. Now they don't run very much because we've changed the energy flow. And then we've increased the efficiency of the air conditioners so they don't remove very much at all. So now we need a dehumidifier. So all of the new stuff south of the Mason-Dixon line and east of Interstate 35 in Texas require, and up the I-5 corridor to British Columbia is going to require a dehumidifier, an efficient dehumidifier. Now, in my home province of Ontario, we're over-ventilating and they're getting too damn dry. So we're selling humidifiers and we're putting in energy recovery ventilators so that we're not having to humidify as much. That's crazy. I mean, how did that happen in Ontario? I mean, that's because the Leafs aren't winning Stanley Cups. They're focusing on silly physics. Oh, God.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Interesting. We're running low on time, so I just want to cover a couple of quick things. Let's talk about COVID. How much did the pandemic change the way you do business with regards to ventilation and moisture control?
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about COVID that is incredibly obvious, but people aren't paying attention. So here goes. The COVID floats around in the air attached to little particles. And so the bad stuff is attached to a particle. And if you then breathe the particle, you get the bad stuff in you. Does it? If I'm going too fast, you might be a doctor.
No,
Okay.
you're good.
Okay. So water molecules are tiny magnets, H2O. All right. When you increase the humidity, the little bastards stick to the particles, and the particles get heavier and they plate out. So one of the big reasons for increasing humidity to handle COVID was to reduce the amount of COVID transmission. Well, we all got healthy because the humidity went up. We got healthier because we weren't spreading the particles because they were plating out on the surfaces. The only people that didn't understand that were the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. Well, no, we're way more efficient because the higher humidity makes the upper respiratory system work. And I'm saying, you have no freaking idea. There is very little effect on the alveoli and the moisture and the whatever. So the humidification for medical reasons was misunderstood because the higher humidity ended up rotting the houses. And so we replaced COVID with mold. And so what am I dealing with? Remember the cartoon character, Rocky and Bullwinkle, after the parade is over, you got that old guy, sweeping, with the broom.
Mm-hmm.
That's me. That's what I'm doing. I'm the guy coming in after the fact, trying to say, I can't believe you humidified an older building and a newer building that can't possibly survive it. So I think we ended up with more mold problems from a health perspective than we ever had with COVID problems. Now, you imagine how well that's being received, right?
Well, have we stepped back from that? I mean, COVID is endemic now, so it's not really, in national crisis stage. So have we not just gone back to standard procedures or?
No, people are humidifying.
Okay.
People are humidifying. Stop that. That's insane. And then when they're not humidifying, we can't control the humidity because the buildings are so damn efficient.
Right.
Mold is way more of an issue than COVID ever was.
Right.
And my joke is the only people that are happy are the fire people because the buildings are too wet to burn.
Right.
You can use that quote.
Gotcha. Oh, that's a great quote. Yeah, that's a really interesting one.
And then the people walking around with, masks. I mean, I'm like, oh man, don't get me going on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have to talk again. We're running out of time, but we definitely have to chat again, Joseph, and we're going to do that for sure. Before we end this session, though, and I know you have to catch a flight, so that's why I'm watching the clock so carefully. Otherwise, we'd still be going. But there's a question I ask every single guest, okay? And it's my universal question, and what I ask the guests to answer it from whatever perspective they'd like. And Joseph, that $1 million question is, what makes a great building?
It's not complicated. Here's the order of importance. A building that doesn't burn, doesn't fall down because of the Carole King, the earth moves under my feet, or a hurricane. So fire, structure, water control, and then dilution or contaminants. So fire, structure, rainwater, humidity control, and then source control for contaminants, ventilation. Dilution is the solution to indoor pollution after you've done the source control. And there you go. Now, I believe we can insulate up to yin yang wazoo and have all of these things happen. It's easy new construction with a clean sheet of paper. Do you have any idea how difficult that is with a 50-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 100-year-old building?
Yeah.
The existing building stock is going to be where we win or lose this. The new stuff is freaking easy. And the carbon people have no idea. And you probably will never invite me back because I said that. And so here's my argument with the carbon people. If a building lasts 100 or 200 years and is ultra energy efficient, why would you care what went into the building from a carbon sequestration perspective? You folks are idiots. You want a building that lasts a very long time, that's very energy efficient, and you've won the carbon fight. I don't get invited to those conferences.
It's pretty, not to pick sides or anything like that, but I do hear a lot about the concept that the most energy efficient building is the one that already exists, right? The most carbon friendly building is the one that's already out there. So I have heard people say that many times. Robert Bean was the first one to say it on this show, actually. I'm sure you know Robert.
I think he's a legend. But guess what? If that building is then further improved, makes people sick, it ain't the best. Right. And what happens is that, let me tell you about older buildings. The really crappy ones are gone, right?
Right.
Now we change the energy flow. And if we don't do it the right way, we're going to destroy them. And, cleaning up an existing building, old building, you tell me about the carbon footprint now. So now that I'm old and I qualified for seniors discounts, I love the idea of, whoa, I got a really good carbon footprint. The problem is that you do not want to destroy that building. And by trying to make that older building more energy efficient without understanding, we're destroying those buildings. And I don't want to do that. I think we can do it all, but we're not doing it correctly. The newer stuff is a lot easier than the older stuff. And then the older stuff, you wonder this, some of these buildings are historically significant. And the easiest way to fix an older building to have it last another 100 years is to put all of this stuff on the outside. Well, then it's no longer looking like an older building. Right. Do you have any idea how complicated it is to do on the inside? Oh, my God. And if you ever invite me back, you can say, well, how do I take historic buildings and make them energy efficient and carbon, whatchamacallit, and not kill people, make them sick, and do it all on the inside and not irritate the historic people? That's going to require one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer.
Yes, I get it. Look, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I would like to have you back. You and I will chat offline about that. We'll schedule something for the spring because there's just a lot more that needs to be talked about.
It's an honor and a pleasure, and take off, eh?
Yeah, I'm already in the Great White North, so the song lyric just fills itself. Joseph, thank you so much for your time. This was an absolute pleasure.
Vice versa. Take care.
All right, care. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.